A name written in frost is the most temporary writing in the world. Marian Holt had known that since she was a child, since the winter mornings in the rectory, when she would breathe on the cold glass and trace her name in the bloom of it with one finger, and watch it stand for a moment, bright and particular, and hers, and then watch the warmth of the room come and take it, letter by letter, until the glass was clear again, and it was as though she had never been there at all. She had thought it a sad thing then. She thought it a sadder thing now, at 23, travelling north through a snowstorm to marry a man she had never met, because a name in frost was, she had come to understand, very like a poor woman's life. You were permitted to make your small mark upon the world. You were not permitted to make it last. The coach had been 6 hours on the road from the last town, and the snow had been falling the whole of it. And when at last the lamps of the inn swam up yellow out of the white dark, Marian could have wept with the relief of it, except that she had taught herself a long time ago not to weep, weeping being, like singing and laughing, and most other forms of taking up room in the world, a thing not encouraged in a dependent niece. The inn was called the Bell, and it stood where the high road crossed the moor at the bleakest point of the whole bleak county of Derbyshire. And on a fair night it was a lonely place, and on this night it was an ark. The storm had stopped everything that moved. The yard was a chaos of stranded coaches and steaming horses and shouting ostlers, and the inn itself was packed to its old oak rafters with travellers who had given up the road, gentry and farmers, and a parson, and a pair of card sharps, and a fat wool merchant, all of them crammed into the low warm rooms, together by the great democracy of weather, which does not care a straw for rank when the snow comes down. Marian got down, stiff and frozen, her small box handed after her, and stood a moment in the trampled snow of the yard, gathering herself. She was alone. Her uncle had not thought it necessary to send anyone with her beyond the coachman, who was paid to deliver the coach, and not the niece, and who had not spoken 6 words to her in 6 hours. She was being delivered north the way a parcel is delivered, and she would be received at the other end the way a parcel is received, with a check of the direction and a grunt of acknowledgment by a Mr. Sefton of Harlow Cross, a prosperous widower of some 55 years, who wanted a wife to keep his house, and was not particular as to her affections, and to whom her uncle had promised her in settlement of some old tangle of obligation that Marian had never been told the whole of, and was not meant to question. She did not love Mr. Sefton. She had never seen Mr. Sefton. She knew of him only that he was old, and rich in a small way, and wanted a managing sort of woman who would not expect to be courted, and that her uncle had described her to him, in a letter Marian had not been meant to read, and had read, as a sensible plain girl of good family, and no fortune, who would give no trouble. No trouble. That was to be the whole of her epitaph, written while she yet lived. Here lies Marian Holt, who gave no trouble. She lifted her chin, because lifting one's chin was free, and cost nobody anything, and she went in out of the cold. It was in the crush by the great fire that she first saw him, though she did not know then who he was, and would not have behaved one whit differently if she had. The best place by the fire had been taken, as the best places always are, by those most accustomed to taking them. A hard-faced woman in furs had spread herself and her 2 daughters and her maid across the whole of the settle nearest the blaze, and they sat in their warmth and watched the rest of the room shiver with the serene indifference of people who have never in their lives had to stand at the cold edge of anything. And at the other side of the hearth, a little apart, stood a gentleman. Marian noticed him because he was not looking at the fire, or at the furred woman, or at the steaming punch the landlord was carrying round. He was looking at the door, each time it opened, with a kind of weary patience, as a man looks who is waiting for something he does not expect to enjoy. He was tall, and very well dressed, in the plain, expensive way that does not announce itself, and his face was the sort of face that handsome is too small a word for, and cold is too large a one. A grave, still shut face, the face of a man who had learned somewhere to give nothing away, and had been giving nothing away for so long that he had perhaps forgotten there was anything behind it to give. He looked, Marian thought, like a man at his own funeral. He looked like a man being delivered somewhere, the same as she was. She found a corner. She did not expect to be noticed, and she was not. She took out the bread and cheese she had been provident enough to bring, and ate it small, the way one eats when one does not know when the next meal is coming, or who will be expected to pay for it. And she watched the warm, bright, careless room, and felt the particular loneliness of being cold in a place where everyone else is warm. It was the gentleman who broke it, and he did it without a word, and she never afterward fully understood why he did it at all. The furred woman's smallest daughter, a child of perhaps 4, who had been left to fret and fidget while her mother held the fire, had wandered off in the way of bored children, and got herself wedged behind a settle in the crowded room, and begun, quietly at first, and then not quietly, to cry, the lost, frightened wail of a very small person who has discovered that the world is large, and she is not in it where she meant to be. Her mother did not stir. Her mother, indeed, said sharply across the room for someone to stop that dreadful noise, as though the noise were a draught that a servant might be sent to shut out. And the grave, cold gentleman by the fire, who was a stranger to the child, and owed her nothing, set down his glass, and went and got down on one knee in his fine coat in the press of the crowded room, and spoke to her. Marian could not hear what he said. She could see only that he said it quietly, and that the child stopped crying to listen, the way frightened children will, for a voice that takes them seriously, and that he held out his hand, and that the child, after a doubtful moment, took it, and let herself be led back round the settle to her mother, who received her with a slap and a scold, and not one word of thanks to the man who had brought her. The gentleman rose, and brushed off his knee, and went back to his place by the fire, and his cold, shut face had not changed at all, and Marian Holt, watching from her corner, felt something turn over in her chest. Because she knew that face now. She had seen what it covered. A man does not get down in the dirt of a crowded inn for a stranger's crying child, with nothing to gain, and no one of consequence watching, unless somewhere under all the cold there is a great deal that he has decided it is safer not to feel. She knew about that. She had decided a few things were safer not to feel herself. They spoke once that night, and only a little, and it was the merest accident of the crowded room. The landlord was carrying round a great steaming jug, and there was hot wine in it for those who could pay, and small beer for those who could not. And Marian could pay for neither, having spent her last coin on the inside seat, and meaning to make her bread and cheese serve. She was passing the hearth toward her cold corner, when the gentleman, who had got himself a cup and not touched it, held it out to her, simply without ceremony, as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world for a fine gentleman to offer his wine to a plain woman in a travelling cloak. "You look colder than I am," he said. His voice was low and grave, and there was no condescension in it, which surprised her, for she had a great deal of experience of the kind of charity that costs the giver nothing, and the receiver her pride. "I have no use for it. I find I cannot taste anything tonight in any case. You would be doing me a kindness to take it off my hands." Marian looked at the cup and at the cold, shut face above it, and she understood that he had dressed his charity in the only coat she would accept it in, which was the coat of doing him a favour, and that he had done it on purpose, and gently, and that there was a great deal more going on behind that still face than the room supposed. "Thank you," she said, and took it, and warmed her 2 hands round it, and did not drink straight away, only held it, because the warmth of it through her chapped fingers was worth more in that moment than the wine. "You are very kind. People are not, mostly. Not for nothing?" "No," he agreed. "They are not." And something moved behind his eyes, there and gone, the look of a man who had paid a long time to learn exactly how seldom anyone is kind for nothing. "Where are you bound in this weather on your own?" "North," she said. "To be married." She said it flatly, the way one names a place one does not wish to go. "And you?" "South," he said. "To the same." And they looked at one another a moment over the steaming cup, 2 strangers being carried in opposite directions toward 2 weddings neither of them had chosen. And neither of them said any more, because there was no more to say that would not have been too much. And then the furred woman called sharply for the landlord, and the moment closed, and Marian carried her borrowed warmth back to her cold corner, and the gentleman went back to watching the door. But she had felt it, the brief unlooked-for warmth of being seen by another freezing soul. And she kept it, the way you keep a coal. And it was that, as much as the frost itself, that put it into her head, in the grey morning, to leave him something back. The storm blew itself out a little before midnight, and by the grey of the morning the road was passable, just, and the great work of unstranding the ark began. Coaches were dug out, and horses put to, and the yard filled again with shouting, and the travellers who had been crammed so close together for one night by the weather sorted themselves back out into their separate ranks and their separate roads, and forgot one another, as travellers do, the moment the snow let them. Marian's coach was among the first away, for her road ran on north toward Harlow Cross, and her waiting parcel husband, and the gentleman's grand carriage, she saw, was being turned the other way, south, back down the road she had come, toward whatever cold delivery awaited him. They were to part, then, having never spoken, 2 people being carried in opposite directions, toward 2 lives neither of them had chosen. She would never see him again. She did not even know his name, and he most certainly did not know hers. And in a week she would be Mrs. Sefton of Harlow Cross, and the whole of her would be given over to keeping a stranger's house. And there would be nothing left anywhere in the world to say that Marian Holt had ever passed this way, had ever been young, had ever stood in an inn-yard in the snow, and felt her heart turn over for a cold-faced man who got down on his knee for a crying child. His carriage stood waiting while they put the horses to, and its windows were furred thick with the night's frost, white and blind. She did not decide to do it. That was what she would tell herself afterward, and it was true. She was passing close by the carriage on her way to her own coach, her box in her hand, and the frost on the dark glass was so thick and so white, and so exactly like the frost on the rectory windows of her childhood. And there came up in her, all at once, out of some deep place she kept lidded, a need so sharp it was almost a pain to leave one mark on the world before the world closed over her, one small, bright, particular thing that said she had been here, that she had been real, that a woman named Marian had stood in this yard on this morning, and been, for the length of a heartbeat, entirely herself. She set down her box. She lifted one gloved finger to the frosted glass of the Duke of Wintringham's carriage window, and she wrote, quickly, in a clear, running hand, the only word that was wholly and unarguably her own, the one thing her uncle had not been able to barter, and Mr. Sefton would not be able to take. Marian. Then she picked up her box, and she got into her coach, and the door was shut on her, and the wheels broke free of the snow with a lurch, and she was carried away north toward Harlow Cross without ever once looking back, because she did not dare, because she was afraid that if she looked back, she would not be able to bear going on. She did not see the carriage door open behind her. She did not see the tall, grave gentleman come out into the cold. She thought she had left her mark on a blind window for no one, and that it would melt, as such marks always melted, before the carriage had gone a mile. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about almost everything that morning, which was the morning her whole life turned over without her knowing it, the way the deep currents of a river turn far below the calm of the surface. The Duke of Wintringham had been inside the carriage when she wrote it. He had been sitting in the cold dark of it, waiting for the horses, his mind already gone ahead of him down the southern road to the thing that waited at the end of it, when the letters had appeared on the glass before his eyes. He had not understood them at first, for they came to him reversed, written from the outside, a private hand pressing through from a world he could not see into the small closed world where he sat. And then his eye had made the turn that the mind makes, and the reversed letters had resolved themselves, and he had read, hanging in the white frost a hand's breadth from his face, the single word, Marian. He had sat perfectly still and watched it. He did not know whose hand had written it. He could see, through the clear strokes where the frost had been wiped away, a narrow slice of the bright yard beyond, and figures moving in it. And he could not tell which of them had done this thing, had reached out of the anonymous cold and written a name on his window, as though leaving a message in a bottle for whoever might be sealed inside. A name, not a plea, not a direction, not a word of begging, such as the poor pressed on him daily through every kind of window. Only a name, only the smallest and the proudest thing a person can offer. Here I am. This is who I am. I was real. I passed this way. He had got the door open and come out into the yard. But the yard was all motion and snow, and there were 100 women in it, muffled and hooded against the cold, and not one of them was looking at him, and not one of them wore a sign that said, I am Marian, and a coach was already pulling away north with a lurch and a spray of snow, and another, and another, and the moment was gone, scattered into the general scramble of the morning. and he stood there, bareheaded, in the cold like a fool, with no notion in the world which of the departing coaches carried the hand that had written to him. And when he turned back to the carriage, the name was already going. The warmth of the day, such as it was, the pale sun struggling through, the breath of the horses had begun their work, and the bright, clear strokes of it were softening, blurring, running, the way frost runs. And he watched, helpless, as the letters of a name he did not know lost their edges, and slid and failed, and were gone, until the glass was only clear glass, wet now and ordinary, with no sign on it that anyone had ever written anything there at all. He had it by heart, though. He found he had it entirely by heart, every line of the running hand, as though it had been written not on the glass, but on him. Crabbe, his coachman, an old, hard, silent man who had driven the family 30 years, came to ask was his Grace ready, and found his master standing in the snow, staring at a blank, wet window, and asked it again. And the Duke said, "Crabbe, the coaches that have just gone north. Where do they go?" "North Road, your Grace. Up over the moor to Harlow Cross and Tissington, and the towns beyond." "Why, has your Grace lost something?" And the Duke of Wintringham, who had everything that the world counts, and had lost, somewhere in the long, cold machinery of his life, the one thing the world does not count, which is the capacity to want, looked at his old coachman and said slowly, as a man says a thing he is only that moment discovering to be true, "Yes, I rather think I have." He had been on his way to be married. That was the whole shape of his life that winter, the destination at the end of the southern road, and he had been travelling toward it for weeks, with the dull obedience of a man who has long since stopped expecting his life to be his own. He was 29, and he had been the Duke of Wintringham since he was 18. Since the cold morning, they came to tell him his father was dead, and with the dukedom he had inherited a great name, a great house, a great quantity of land, and a quantity of debt greater still. For the late Duke had been a man of expensive enthusiasms and indifferent sense, and had left the whole proud edifice of Wintringham resting on a foundation that was quietly rotting from beneath. His mother had saved it. He would never deny her that. The Dowager Duchess Honoria had taken the ruin her husband left, and she had managed and married and mortgaged and contrived for 11 years to keep the great name standing. And the price of the standing, the final stone in the wall she had built against the family's fall, was to be her son's marriage to Lady Sophia Marchwood, only daughter of the Earl of Brent, whose fortune was as large as the Wintringham debts, and whose father wanted a duke for his girl as badly as the dowager wanted an heiress for her boy. It was a good match. Everyone said so. It would set the seal on 11 years of his mother's iron work, and make Wintringham safe for another 100 years. And it had been arranged over his head with all the tender personal feeling of a treaty between two cold countries, and the Duke had assented to it, because assenting was what he did, because choosing things for himself was a habit he had lost so long ago that he no longer noticed its absence, the way a man with an old wound stops noticing the limp. He did not dislike Lady Sophia. He did not feel anything about Lady Sophia at all, which he had taken, until that frozen morning, to be perfectly satisfactory, since feeling things was not a quality the arrangement required of either of them. And then a woman he never saw had written her name on his window in the frost, and he had felt something. One clean, sharp, unmistakable thing, the first in years. The feeling of a window thrown open in a sealed room. The feeling of wanting, and it had ruined him for the southern road entirely. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. He went south. He had to go south. He was expected. The whole great machine of the alliance was turning, and a duke does not simply fail to arrive at his own betrothal because of a word in melted frost. He went to Brentford, to the Earl's cold and splendid house, and he met Lady Sophia again across a dinner table, glittering with the plate of two great families. And he was correct, and she was correct, and their parents watched them be correct at one another, with the satisfaction of two anglers watching a net draw tight. But something had shifted in him, and Lady Sophia, who was a great deal cleverer than her placid face allowed the world to know, saw it. She found a way to speak to him alone on the second evening, in the long gallery, the families safely at their cards. She was a fair, calm, composed young woman of 22, and she had been raised to this marriage as he had, and he had never once wondered what she thought of it, which was, he would later be ashamed to remember, the precise measure of how far the cold had gone into him. "You are not yourself, Your Grace," she said. "Since you came, my father thinks it is the gravity of the occasion. My father is a fool about everything except money, which is the only thing he has ever troubled to understand. I do not think it is gravity. I think something has happened to you on the road. And I find I should like to know what, because I am to spend my life with you. And I have a natural curiosity about the man." He looked at her, this calm, clever stranger he was to marry, and he made, without quite deciding to, the first honest decision he had made in years. He told her. He told her about the snowbound inn, and the crying child, and the name in the frost on the glass, and the way it had gone before he could find the hand that wrote it, and the way he could not stop thinking of it. A woman he had never seen, a name and nothing more, and how it had woken something in him that he had thought was dead, and that he did not know what to do, because he was a man of honor, and he was promised to her. And yet, Lady Sophia Marchwood listened to the whole of it without a flicker. And when he had done, she was quiet a moment, and then she did an extraordinary thing. She laughed, a soft, real, relieved laugh, and she sat down on the gallery window seat as though a great weight had come off her, and she said, "Oh, thank God. Thank God. I thought I should have to marry you." He stared at her. "Your Grace," she said, "I am going to tell you something I have told no one but my maid, who is loyal, and my own pillow, which is discreet. There is a man, a perfectly unsuitable man, a younger son with a profession, and 400 a year, whom I have loved for 2 years, and whom my father would sooner see me dead than married to. I agreed to this match with you because I am a dutiful daughter, and I could see no way out that did not break my family, and I have been grieving my whole heart, quietly, behind a calm face, for 6 months, and despairing. And now you come to me, and tell me you have lost your heart to a name in the frost, and I could embrace you for it, because do you not see what it means? It means neither of us wants this. It means we are 2 prisoners who have each been pretending to the other that we like the cell. And 2 prisoners, Your Grace, who discover they are agreed, are a great deal harder to keep than 1. And the Duke of Wintringham, who had walked into that long gallery, a man alone in his trouble, looked at his betrothed, and found, against every expectation, an ally. They made their plan there, in the cold gallery, the two of them, in low, quick voices, like conspirators, which is what they were. It would not be easy. Two great families had built this alliance, and two great families would not see it dissolved without a struggle. And the Dowager Honoria, above all, who had spent 11 years on it, would fight to her last breath to hold it together. But Sophia knew her father, and the Duke knew his mother, and between them they understood the machine they were caught in well enough to know where it might be broken. The Earl wanted the dukedom. Very well, there were other dukedoms, and Sophia, freed of Wintringham, could be steered toward her younger son if the thing were managed with patience and a little ruthlessness. And the Duke, freed of Sophia, could go and do the thing his whole soul now bent toward, which was to find the woman who had written her name on his window and gone north into the snow. Find her first, Sophia counselled him, shrewd, before you break anything. You cannot throw over the alliance of the season for a name in the frost. My father would have you in Bedlam, and your mother would help him. But find her. Learn whether she is real, whether she is free, whether she is anything to you beyond a fancy born of a cold morning. And then, if she is, come back, and we will pull the whole house down together, you and I, and each of us go free. But find her first. It was good counsel. He took it. He took it north, in the worst winter the Peak had seen in 20 years, with old Crab on the box, and a few clues that were hardly clues at all. A Christian name, a direction, a morning, and an inn called the Bell. And there, at the Bell, the search very nearly died before it had begun, because a coaching inn in a great storm keeps no register of the 100 souls it shelters, and the landlord remembered nothing and everything, and could put no name to any face, and there had been 40 women on the north coaches that morning, and they had gone to 40 different ends of the cold north country, and the Duke of Wintringham stood in the tap-room of the Bell where it had all begun, and understood that he was looking for a single melted snowflake in a county under snow. It was Crab who saved it. Old, hard, silent Crab, who had been listening, in the way of servants, while his betters despaired, and who said in the yard, turning his hat in his hands, "Begging your Grace's pardon. The coaches keep a way bill. The booking offices, not the inn. Every soul that takes a seat is wrote down at the office where they book it, with their name and their fare, and where they're set down. The inn's no good to us. But the office that booked that north coach, now, that office has a book, and a name in a book don't melt. A name in a book does not melt." The Duke could have kissed his coachman's grizzled face. They traced the coach. It took 11 days, 11 days of frozen roads and dead ends, and the slow, patient, unglamorous work of following a paper thread through the booking offices of half of Derbyshire, 11 days in which the Duke of Wintringham, who had never in his life done a single thing for himself that a servant could do for him, sat in cold offices and read down columns of names in clerks' crabbed hands, looking. There were days he was sure it was hopeless. There was an evening, the 8th day, in a wretched posting town where the snow had come on again, and the office had no fire, and the clerk could not read his own master's hand, when the Duke of Wintringham sat alone in the back of the cold carriage, with the lamp guttering, and very nearly turned for home. It was madness, the small, sensible voice in him said, the voice that sounded a great deal like his mother. a name in melted frost. A glimpse he had not even truly had of a woman he could not have described if his life hung on it. He was a duke chasing a snowflake across a frozen county, throwing over the work of 11 years and the safety of 1,000 souls for a fancy, for a word on a window, and any reasonable man would go home and marry the heiress and forget he had ever felt anything at all. And then he had thought, sitting there in the dark with his hand pressed to the cold glass where another such name had once stood, that being reasonable was the very thing that had killed him by inches for 11 years. That he had been reasonable since he was 18, and it had made of him a cold-shut man who could not taste his wine, and that the first unreasonable thing he had ever wanted in his adult life was the one thing his whole nature now told him not to abandon. So he did not turn for home. He told Crab to find a fresh team and go on through the snow, and Crab, who had buried his own wife 40 years gone, and had his own opinions about men who let things slip away from them, said only, "Aye, your grace," and went on. And at last, on the 11th day, in a poky office in a market town, under the bookings for that very morning, on the north coach to Harlow Cross, and the towns beyond, he found it. Halfway down the page, in a clerk's indifferent copperplate, a name, an affair, and a destination. Miss M. Holt, to Harlow Cross. One inside, M. Holt. Marion. He knew it the way he had known the frost. And a destination, at last. Harlow Cross. He learned the rest in pieces, in the way one learns such things, from a talkative postmistress and a gossiping ostler, and the general loose change of country knowledge that lies about for any man patient enough to gather it. He learned that Miss Holt had come north to be married. He learned to whom? To a Mr. Sefton of Harlow Cross, a warm man, a careful man, a widower well past 50, who had buried 2 wives already and wanted a third to manage his house, and was not, folk said with a certain dryness, expected to break his heart over the choosing. He learned that the match had been made by the young lady's uncle and guardian, a Mr. Josiah Holt, a hard, cold man of business down south, who had got the girl off his hands and discharged some old debt or favour to Sefton in the one stroke, the way a man clears 2 columns of a ledger with a single entry. He learned that the girl had come alone, in the snow, with 1 box, and that she was reckoned a quiet, plain, genteel sort, who gave herself no airs, and that the wedding was set, and that the wedding was soon. How soon? He asked the postmistress, with his heart going hard. 3 days, she said. 3 days, at the little church at Harlow Cross. A small wedding. They generally were, she added, with the same dryness, for a third wife to an old man. Nothing to make a fuss of. 3 days. The Duke of Wintringham went out into the frozen yard and stood looking north, toward Harlow Cross, where a woman who had written her name on his window was about to be given, quiet and plain and giving no airs, to an old man who would not break his heart over her. And he felt rise up in him, hot and total and entirely new. A refusal, a great roaring no, the first thing his whole nature had insisted upon in 11 years. He would not have it. He did not yet know what he would have instead, did not know whether she would want him, did not know what right he had to come riding out of the snow into a stranger's life and overturn it. He knew only that he could not, would not, stand by and let that particular flame, the one bright particular Marion who had reached out of the cold and written herself on his blind window, be snuffed quietly out in a market town church to clear a line in two men's ledgers. But before he could ride to Harlow Cross, he had a debt of his own to discharge, and it was waiting for him at Wintringham, and her name was Honoria. His mother had followed him north. He should have known she would. The Dowager Duchess had spies the way other women had servants, and she had learned within days that her son, instead of pressing forward the alliance she had spent 11 years building, had bolted into the Derbyshire snow on some errand his servants would not name, and she had come after him in her own travelling chariot, grim and upright and very cold, to bring her boy to his senses. She was waiting for him in the great hall at Wintringham, when he came in, frozen from the road, a small, straight, terrible old woman by the cold hearth, and she did not waste words. "You will tell me," she said, "that there is a sensible explanation. You will tell me that you have not endangered the work of 11 years, the safety of this entire house, the bread of every soul on this land, for some madness you contracted on a public road. You will tell me I have heard wrong." "You have not heard wrong," he said. He was very tired and very cold, and oddly calm, the calm of a man who has at last stopped pretending. "Mother, sit down. I am going to tell you the truth, all of it, and it is going to distress you, and I am sorry for that. But I have done with managing you and being managed by you, and we are going to speak to one another, for once, as two people, and not as two officers of the same cold firm." And he told her. He told her about the frost on the window. He told her about the 11 days of booking offices. He told her about Marian Holt, and Harlow Cross, and the old man, and the 3 days. And he told her, last, the thing that was hardest of all to say to the iron woman who had saved the house by never once permitting herself a feeling. "I have been your good son, mother. I have been obedient for 11 years. I have let you mortgage me to the alliance as you mortgaged the land, because you needed to, because the house was falling, and you were holding it up with your 2 hands, and I would not add to your burden by being difficult. But I cannot do this last thing. I cannot marry the safety of the house and bury the only living feeling I have had since my father died. I will not, and I am asking you, who saved us all, to find some other way to be safe, because this way costs more than I am able to pay." The Dowager Honoria sat very still through all of it, and her face did not change. Her face never changed, and when he had finished, there was a long, cold silence in the great hall. And then she said, in a voice that was not quite steady, which he had never in his life heard, "Do you know to whom I was married?" He did not understand the question. "To my father." "To your father?" She looked into the dead grate. "I was 19. I had loved a man, a perfectly ineligible man. The way you say this Marian person has woken something in you. And my father called me into his study and explained to me, very reasonably, that my feelings were a luxury the family could not afford, and that I was to marry the Marquis of Wintringham, as he then was, who was 40, and whom I did not know, because the family needed his name and his fortune, and that a sensible woman put away childish things. And I was a sensible woman. I put them away. I married your father, who was not unkind, and not kind, and not anything very much. And I did my duty for 30 years, and I held this house together with my 2 hands when he died and left it falling. And I have never, not once, in 40 years, permitted myself to wonder what the other life would have been. Because to wonder is to go mad, and a woman in my position is not allowed to go mad." She turned and looked at her son, and her old eyes were terrible, and they were wet. "I arranged your marriage," she said, "the way mine was arranged, because it was what I knew, because I have spent my whole life believing that feeling is the thing you sacrifice, and safety is the thing you buy, and that anyone who chooses otherwise is a fool who will bring the house down on all their heads. And I look at you now, and you are telling me you mean to be that fool. And the dreadful thing, the thing I cannot forgive, is not that you are throwing away the alliance. It is that I am sitting here, an old woman who put her own heart in the ground at 19 and called it virtue, and I am envying you. God help me. I am sitting here, envying my own son the courage I was never permitted to have." The Duke of Wintringham crossed the cold hall and knelt down before his mother's chair, as he had once knelt before a crying child in an inn, and he took the iron hands that had held up his whole world, and he said, "Then let me have the courage for both of us, Mother. Let me be the fool, and let the house take its chance, the way houses must, because a house that can only be saved by burying its children alive is not worth the saving, and you have given too much to it already, and I will not let it take you too, not the last of you, not the part that just told me the truth." And the Dowager Duchess Honoria, who had not wept in 40 years, who had put her own heart in the ground at 19 and stood guard over the grave of it ever since, put her face down against her son's cold hair, and wept at last, terribly, for the girl of 19, and the life she had not lived, and the Duke held her, and the great cold house of Wintringham, for the first time in longer than anyone living could remember, held something warm. "Go to Harlow Cross," she said at last, when she could speak. "Go now, tonight. Do not wait for the morning. The roads are bad, and the wedding is in 3 days, and you will want every hour of it. And Lawrence." She had not used his name, his given name, in years. "If she is real, if she is what the frost made you believe she is, then you bring her home to me, and I will love her as I never let myself love anything, because she will have done for you the one thing I was too much a coward to do for myself. Now go." He went. Marian had come to Harlow Cross on the worst day of the worst week of the winter, the snow driving level off the moor, and the house that was to be hers had risen up out of the white murk, grey and square, and shut. A prosperous house, a cared-for house, with good curtains in the windows, and a good fire in the hall, and not one thing in it that was glad to see her. Mr. Sefton's housekeeper, a Mrs. Vesey, who had run the house through 2 wives already, and meant to go on running it through a third, had looked her up and down in the hall with the flat, appraising eye of a woman taking the measure of her next mistress, and finding her unlikely to give much trouble, which was the housekeeper's whole ambition in a mistress, and had shown her to a cold, good room, and left her there with the snow ticking at the glass. She had her first sight of Mr. Sefton at supper, and her first sight told her the whole of it. He was a heavy, comfortable, grey-whiskered man, who ate well, and spoke little, and looked at her, over the good plain food, with exactly the mild satisfaction of a man who has bought a sound horse at a fair price, and is pleased to find it has turned up as described. He asked her whether she had had a tolerable journey. He told her the house ran on regular hours, and that he kept early ones. He observed that she was sensible-looking, which he plainly meant for the highest praise in his gift, and that he had had enough in his life of women who wanted managing, and hoped she would not be one. And then he had returned to his mutton, his business with her concluded, the chair inspected and approved, and Marian had sat across the wide, cold table from the man she was to spend her life beside, and understood that she could grow old and grey, and die in this house, and Mr. Sefton would never once, not on the day of her death, wonder what she had thought about, or feared, or loved, because it had not occurred to him that a sensible wife was a thing that thought, or feared, or loved at all. She did not weep. She had given that up. But on the third night, alone in the cold good room, she did the one thing that was left to her, which was to make a small private resolution. And a poor woman's resolution is the only territory in all the world that no uncle and no husband can enter without her leave. She resolved that she would not pretend. She would marry him because she had no power on earth to refuse, and she would keep his house honestly and well because she was honest and she did things well. But she would not perform a gladness she did not feel, would not simper, would not flatter, would not make herself smaller than she was to soothe a man who had not troubled to ask her name twice. She would give good service and keep her own soul. And if that was insolence in a third wife bought to clear a debt, then she would be insolent, quietly, every day, in the one room of herself that was still her own. It was not much. It was a name written in frost. But she had learned that a name written in frost was not nothing, whatever the world said. And she held to her small, cold resolution the way she had held to the borrowed cup of wine, for the warmth that was in it. She had taken out her father's worn Bible, the one thing the bailiffs had not got, and the uncle had not wanted, and she had read in it a little, not for the comfort of religion exactly, of which she had less than she let the world suppose, but for the comfort of her father's hand in the margins, his small, wise jokes penciled beside the grave verses, the only conversation left to her with the one person who had ever looked at her as though she mattered. And she had thought of the gentleman at the inn, who had looked at her a little that way too, for the space of one borrowed cup, and was gone now south to his own cold delivery. And she had been glad, fiercely and privately glad, that she had written her name on his window, because it meant that somewhere in the world, for as long as the frost lasted, there had been one bright mark that said Marian Holt was real, before the warmth of an indifferent life came and wiped her clean away. Marian Holt was to be married on the Thursday, and on the Wednesday evening she sat alone in the cold best parlour of Mr. Sefton's house at Harlow Cross, and looked at the wedding clothes laid out across the chair, and tried, as she had been trying for a week, to be sensible. She had met Mr. Sefton now. He was not a cruel man. She had braced herself for cruelty, and found instead something almost worse, which was indifference, a settled, comfortable indifference. A man who looked at her the way he looked at a new chair he had ordered, checking that it was sound and would serve and was not too dear, and finding her satisfactory, and thinking no more about it. He had told her, kindly enough, that he hoped she would be comfortable, that he kept a good table, that he asked only a quiet house and a sensible management of it, and would not trouble her with demands a woman of her age and sense would find disagreeable. He had meant it for reassurance. It had landed on her like a stone, because it was the final closing of the door. the plain statement that she was to spend the whole long remainder of her life being satisfactory to a man who would never once look at her the way the cold gentleman at the inn had looked at a crying child, as though she were a person whose trouble was worth getting down in the dirt for. She thought of the inn often. She had not meant to, but she did. She thought of the grave shut face, and the kneeling, and the name she had written in the frost, her one foolish rebellion, her one mark on the blind window of the world, and she was glad she had done it, even though no one had seen, even though it had melted, even though it had changed nothing, and could change nothing, because it had been hers, the one wholly free thing she had done in a life of being delivered from one man's keeping to another's. She had been Marian for one heartbeat in an inn-yard in the snow. It would have to be enough. It was a great deal more than most poor women got. She was thinking exactly that, with the wedding clothes laid out, and the candle low and the cold pressing at the dark window, when there was a commotion in the yard below, the sound of a horse hard ridden, and a hammering at Mr. Sefton's door at an hour when no honest visitor calls, and voices raised, and Mr. Sefton's outraged tones, and then, cutting through all of it, a voice she did not know, and somehow did know, a low, grave voice asking, demanding, for Miss Marian Holt, and not to be put off, and not to be denied. She was at the top of the stairs before she knew she had risen. She looked down into the cold hall, where Mr. Sefton stood in his nightcap blustering, and a servant held a candle high, and where, just inside the door, snow still on his shoulders, and his face grey with cold and hard riding, stood the gentleman from the inn, the Duke of Wintringham, though she did not know him by that name. Not yet. The man who had knelt for a crying child, the man whose window she had written her name on, thinking it would melt and mean nothing. He looked up and saw her on the stairs, and the whole of his cold, shut face came open, all at once, like a window thrown wide. And Marian Holt understood, with a shock that went through her like cold water, and like warmth at once, that it had not melted after all. That somehow, impossibly, the one free mark she had made on the world had not vanished. That he had read it, and kept it, and come. "You wrote your name on my window," he said. He said it across the hall, across the staring servant and the spluttering bridegroom, as though there were no one else in the world to hear it. In the frost, at the bell, and it melted before I could find you. And I have looked for you for a fortnight, through every booking office in this county, because I could not stop, because in 29 years it is the only thing anyone has ever written to me that asked for nothing and gave me everything. Only your name, only Marian, only here I am, and I have come to tell you that I read it, and that I did not let it melt, and that I have it still, and I always will." "Sir," sputtered Mr. Sefton. "Sir, this is an outrage. This woman is to be married to me on the morrow. You cannot." "This woman," said the Duke, never taking his eyes from the stairs, "is to be married to no one she does not choose. Those days are done. I have buried them tonight at Wintringham, with my own mother's blessing, and they will not rise again." And then to Marian, lo, all the grandeur gone out of him, only a tired man at the foot of a cold stair. "I do not come to take you. I want that understood above all things. You have been handed from your uncle to this gentleman, like a parcel, and I will not be one more man who comes to carry you off and call it love. I come to offer you a thing you have not been given in a long time, I think. perhaps not ever. A choice. You owe nothing to me. You owe nothing to him. Your uncle's debts are not yours to pay with your life. Tomorrow's wedding will not happen. I have seen to that, whatever you decide about me. You are free, Marian. As of this moment, you are entirely free, and there is a carriage at the door, and you may go in it wherever in the world you wish to go, and I will see you safe there, and trouble you no further. Or, said Marian, from the top of the stairs, and her voice shook, the first time it had shaken in a year. Or you may come to Wintringham, he said, where there is an old woman who very much wants to meet the person who wrote her name in the frost, and where there is a man who has discovered, too late to be sensible about it, that he had stopped being alive some years ago, and did not begin again until a stranger reached out of the snow and wrote one word on his blind window. I am that man. My name is Lawrence. I am, for my sins and my father's, the Duke of Wintringham, which I tell you not to dazzle you, for I think you are the last woman in England to be dazzled, but only because you should know the whole of what you are choosing or refusing. Come, or do not, but choose it, Marian, for yourself, freely, the way you wrote your name. That is all I ask, that you choose. The cold hall was utterly still. Mr. Sefton had stopped spluttering. The servant's candle guttered. 1 breath, 2, 3, and Marian, at the top of the stair, stood very still, and did the hardest thing she had done in the whole of her hard life, which was to think clearly in the one moment she had been waiting for, without knowing she waited for it. For it would have been the easiest thing in the world to run down those stairs into the warm, astonishing fact of being wanted, of being come for, of being the one woman in a cold county that a duke had ridden 11 days through the snow to find. She was 23, and she had never once been chosen. And here at the foot of the stair stood a man offering to choose her before the whole staring world, and every starved thing in her strained toward it. But she had made herself a resolution, 3 nights gone in a cold room, that she would not be handed from one man's keeping to another's, that she would keep the one room of herself that was her own, and she found, looking down at him, that the resolution held even now, even here, even against this. A duke who came to carry her off was still a man come to carry her off, however gently, however the heart leapt, and she had had a bellyful of being carried. So she looked for the thing she needed to see before she moved a foot, and she found it. And it was this, that he had not commanded her, as her uncle would have, nor inspected her, as Sefton had, but had stood in the cold hall and laid the whole choice in her own 2 hands, and stepped back from it, had said, choose, and had meant it, had built her a door, and then stood away from it so that she might walk through under her own power, or not at all. He had given her, a man who had every right and power to simply take, the one thing no one had given her since her father died. He had given her her own will back, and asked nothing for it, and waited. That was what undid her. Not the title, and not the rescue, and not the 11 days. That he had ridden through a county of snow to lay a free choice at the foot of a stranger's stair, and then trust her to make it. A man who would do that, she thought, was a man who had looked at her at the inn, and seen, behind the plain, sensible woman who gave no trouble, a person whose will was worth restoring to her. It was the look her father had given her. It was the look she had despaired of ever being given again. And Marian Holt came down the stairs. She came down slowly, in no one's keeping, neither carried nor delivered, nor handed from one man to another. A free woman crossing a cold hall under her own power for the first time in her life. And she came to stand before the Duke of Wintringham. And she looked at him, full in the face, the way she had looked at no one in years, the way one looks at a person one means to keep. "You came," she said, "for a name in the frost. That should have melted." "It did melt," he said. "On the glass. It did not melt anywhere that mattered." She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "I have spent my whole life being told I gave no trouble. It was meant for praise. It was the worst thing anyone ever said of me, and I made my peace with it, because peace was cheaper than the alternative." She lifted her chin, the old free gesture, the one thing they had never been able to take. "I find I should like, very much, to give a great deal of trouble. Starting tonight. Starting with not marrying Mr. Sefton, which I think will trouble a number of people exceedingly, and which I am going to enjoy more than is strictly Christian. And the almost shut, almost cold, almost buried thing in the Duke of Winthringham's face came the rest of the way open, into the first whole smile Marian had seen on it, which transformed it utterly, the way the thaw transforms the moor. And Mr. Sefton went off to bed in a fury, and was not greatly grieved by Thursday, having merely to find another satisfactory chair. And Marian Holt walked out of the cold house at Harlow Cross into the snow, of her own free choosing, and got into the carriage with the frosted windows, and was carried south this time toward a place she had chosen, which is a different journey entirely from being delivered, though the roads be the very same. They were married in the spring, when the snow had gone off the high moors at last, and the becks ran full and loud with the melt of it in the small church on the Wintringham land. And it was not a grand wedding, the bride having no taste for grandeur, and the groom having lost his. But the whole of the estate came to it, every soul on the land, because the new Duchess had a way of speaking to a person as though he were worth the speaking to, whatever coat he stood up in. And word of that travels faster on an estate than any herald. The Dowager Honoria gave the bride her own mother's pearls, which she had not worn in 40 years, and she wept again at the wedding, which the household found so alarming, the Iron Dowager weeping twice in one season, that it was talked of below stairs for a decade. She loved Marian in the end, as fiercely as she had loved nothing in her long guarded life, because Marian had done the brave thing the Dowager had been too frightened to do. And there is a particular tenderness the old keep for the young, who manage to escape the trap the old walked straight into. The house was not, in fact, ruined. It came nearer than the Dowager liked, for the Brent alliance was lost, and Lady Sophia married her unsuitable younger son with his profession and his 400 a year, and was, by every report, radiantly and improperly happy, and sent the new Duchess of Wintringham a letter once a month full of an affection that scandalized both their mothers. But a great estate, carefully managed, can weather the loss of a marriage it can no longer be permitted to make. And Marian, it turned out, had a head for management that her uncle had used for years without ever once thinking to pay her for it. And between her sense and the Dowager's iron and the Duke's discovery, late but real, that a man might actually attend to his own affairs, Wintringham came through, smaller and plainer than the Dowager's pride would once have allowed, and happier than it had been within living memory. It was not a triumph without cost. Marian knew that, and never forgot it. There were things the world did not give back. The years of being a parcel were spent and gone. Her father, who had loved her and left her nothing but his goodness, was dead and would never see the daughter he had called the kindest girl in the county become the Duchess of anywhere. Her uncle, written to coldly and once, did not trouble to reply, having no further use for a niece who had stopped being a debt to be discharged and become a duchess to be resented, which is a thing certain men cannot forgive. The world did not hand back the wasted years. It never does. But it had, against all the odds and all the frost, handed her a life she had chosen, and that was a thing so rare among women of her old station, that she held it every day the way you hold a coal in winter, carefully, gratefully, knowing its worth. The Duke kept the carriage. He would not have it sold, nor the window changed, the window she had written on. And once, the first winter of their marriage, on a hard, frosty morning, when the bloom lay thick and white on the glass, exactly as it had at the bell, he took her out to it, and he put a finger to the frost himself, clumsily, a man who had never been taught to leave marks, because the world had always been so careful to mark everything for him. And he wrote, slow and ill-formed, a single word: Marian. There, he said. I have written it now, too. It will melt, the same as yours did. But you taught me the thing I had got entirely wrong all my life, which is that it does not matter that it melts. It mattered that you wrote it. It mattered that you were there, on that morning, and reached out of all that cold, and made one bright mark to say so. I had a whole life of names that do not melt, Marian, names cut in marble, and cast in bronze, and entered in the great proud books that outlast the people in them, and not one of them ever reached me, not one of them ever made me feel a single living thing. And then a poor woman with no fortune, and one box wrote her name in melting frost on my blind window, expecting nothing, expecting it to vanish. And it was the only writing in my whole life that ever truly arrived. So I will write yours back to you every frost there is, and let it melt every time, and not mind it, because the writing was always the thing, not the last. And Marian Holt, who was the Duchess of Wintringham now, but who would always, in the deep private place where a person keeps the truest thing about herself, be the girl who had written her name on a stranger's window, thinking it would mean nothing to no one, watched her name stand bright and particular on the cold glass, and begin, already, gently, to fade. She did not mind the fading. He had taught her that, in his turn, the same lesson back again, which is how it goes with two people who have each saved the other, that the mark need not last to be real. She had made her mark on the blind window of the world, once in the cold, expecting it to melt, and a man inside, sealed in his cold, proud carriage, had read it, and had not let it melt where it mattered, and had not stopped, through 11 days of frozen roads, and 40 years of his mother's grief, and the whole iron weight of a name he had never asked for, until he had found the hand that wrote it. A name in frost is the most temporary writing in the world. Marian had believed that her whole life, and grieved it, and made her peace with it. She had been wrong. Some names, written in the cold by a free hand, expecting nothing, reach the one heart that was waiting to read them, and never melt at all. And it made all the difference. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.